I've spent 300 hours fixing Disney's design, completely transforming the original concept of Elsa and Olaf from Frozen, creating something entirely new. In this video, we're going to dive into the creative process behind this drawing, from sketching, shading the illustration, coloring it, adding a fitting backdrop for the new character, and finally incorporating relevant effects for an eye-catching result. All of this done using traditional digital illustration techniques. Welcome to Reimagined. Thank you for tuning in to the first video on the channel, a space where you'll find old-school digital illustration, concept art, and Photoshop. A channel meant for inspiration, learning to draw, and unleashing your creativity. But before we dive in, let's outline how we'll tackle the challenge. And for that, I've chosen a specific art style: dark fantasy. The origins of dark fantasy art stem from the rich tradition of fantasy, but with a darker, more macabre twist. It delves into themes like the grotesque, the supernatural, and the surreal, often with a melancholic and mysterious aesthetic. This genre emerged as a reaction to conventional fantasy, challenging established narratives and styles to offer a more complex and sinister vision of the imaginary world. Some of the most influential artists in the field of dark fantasy include H.R. Giger, famous for his biomechanical style, merging organic and mechanical elements into a surreal and often unsettling world. Zdzisław Beksinski's surreal and apocalyptic paintings capture deformed landscapes and figures in a dark and disturbing style, utilizing a unique blend of color and texture to create deeply unsettling atmospheres. Frank Frazetta, renowned for his iconic fantasy artwork, is celebrated for dynamic compositions and muscular, heroic figures. His work epitomizes the epitome of classic fantasy, often depicting powerful warriors, fearsome monsters, and epic battles. Frazetta's mastery lies in his ability to capture movement, emotion, and raw energy in his pieces, creating a sense of awe and adventure. His influence on the genre of dark fantasy is profound, shaping the visual language and inspiring countless artists to explore the realms of imagination with boldness and vigor. But in this video, I'd like to highlight the work and style of one of my favorite contemporary dark fantasy artists. In fact, he has a notably significant presence on his own YouTube channel. And that artist is none other than Karl Kopinski. This man is a genius. Karl Kopinski's style is a masterful blend of dark fantasy and realism, characterized by intricate details, bold contrasts, and a gritty aesthetic. Born in the UK, Kopinski's journey as an artist took shape through his early fascination with fantasy and science fiction. He gained widespread recognition for his contributions to the world of collectible card games, notably his stunning artwork for Magic: The Gathering cards. His illustrations for Magic cards are marked by their rich storytelling, captivating viewers with vivid scenes of magic myth and adventure. Kopinski's talents expanded further as he ventured into the realm of conceptual art for Warhammer, a renowned tabletop wargame. His contributions to the Warhammer universe are celebrated for their depth and creativity, breathing life into the game's iconic characters and settings with his distinctive style. One of Kopinski's remarkable achievements lies in his reinterpretation of classical military themes within the context of fantasy. He seamlessly blends elements of historical warfare with fantastical elements, creating compelling characters and scenes that resonate with authenticity and imagination. His skillful portrayal of medieval fantasy characters exudes a sense of realism and depth, capturing the essence of heroism and struggle in a way that is both captivating and immersive. With that same premise of blending realism and dark fantasy, I intend to tackle this video, reimagining Elsa and Olaf as if they were exiled ice witches from the very realms of Warhammer fantasy. So let's begin. I've started sketching Elsa in a very rough manner. At this stage of my workflow, I focus more on the conceptual ideas I want to implement from approximate lines. Besides implementing those ideas, I also focus on the form and shape language. Shape language allows for very attractive results for the eye, even when technically the drawing can be improved. A good shape language can lay the groundwork for great conceptual art, even before a highly refined illustration technique with poor shape language. So, in this phase, it's important to remember 1. The implementation of ideas that constitute the narrative of the character we are drawing, and 2. The shape language which contributes to that narrative aspect of what we are trying to convey. Speaking of ideas that contribute to the character's narrative, and in response to the question of what would Elsa be like as a character in dark fantasy, I've based it on the concept of a forest witch, an ancient woman, a dark sorceress with profound arcane knowledge, powerful ice magic as seen in the original film, as well as knowledge of plants, mushrooms, and potions, and all things related to alchemy that come to mind when discussing the culturally widespread conception of the witch. The inclusion of human and animal skulls, feathers, and mushrooms contribute to giving that narrative aspect of a forest witch as a being of great knowledge and twisted intentions. In that sense, the Amanita Muscaria depicted on the right side of the image helps conceptualize that this dark fantasy Elsa is a gatherer of whatever she finds in the forests and can be useful for her alchemy and dark rituals. In fact, the Amanita muscaria, commonly known as the fly agaric or fly amanita, is a species of mushroom that has historically been associated with tales of witches, poisons, and mystery. It is perhaps one of the most recognizable and distinctive mushrooms in the world due to its unique and often vibrant appearance, with its iconic red cap speckled with white spots. Although its appearance is attractive, the Amanita muscaria is known to be toxic and, in some cases, can be deadly if ingested in large quantities. This mushroom has been shrouded in an aura of mysticism and folklore due to its hallucinogenic effects and its association with rituals and shamanic practices in various cultures. Ritual uses of Amanita muscaria have been recorded historically in regions such as Siberia and Northern Europe, where it is believed to have been consumed by shamans in religious and visionary ceremonies. Regarding its connection to witch tales, this mushroom has often been depicted in the iconography of witches and has been associated with the idea of potions and poisons used in witchcraft. After having drawn all the approximate lines and having all the concepts that contribute to the character's narrative, I begin to refine that rough sketch. To do this, I'm using a brush with some texture and no transparency at all to form the definitive linear with which we will start working on shadows, color, and details. At this stage of my workflow, I focus on obtaining clean lines that do not cause confusion, when later those same lines will be what separate the different shapes and geometries that we will proceed to shade next. It's important to remember that for your linear to have character, varying line thickness contributes to emphasizing certain parts, highlighting those where a thicker line is used and relegating to a background those lines we might consider secondary. Although I will erase the linear art in its final version, I like to work with different thicknesses, something that even before starting the shading gives me a first sense of perspective. For example, in The Witch's Hand, you'll notice how I emphasize the thickness of the line. This enhances the feeling that the character's hand is one of the elements closest to the viewer's screen, as well as being one of the most central and characteristic elements of our dark fantasy Elsa. We can also subtly appreciate this thicker line in the character's silhouette, emphasizing its boundary and enhancing that shape language we discussed earlier. The witch's hat, or the antlers of the deer skull, are also elements whose lines are emphasized due to the narrative importance they add to the character. Once the linear art, completely polished, is finished, we can begin the next phases of the process. By that point, we will have succeeded in our drawing if we have fulfilled three very important general aspects. 1. The sketch has allowed us to add all the narrative elements that contribute to developing the character's backstory in a single image. 2. The shape language is optimal in terms of perspective, proportions, and it adds to that character narrative. 3. The linear art has allowed us to cleanly define the areas and create contrasts between elements to which we want to give more prominence or less. So, with the sketch and linear art phases completed, we will proceed with the longest phase of the drawing, but one that adds a lot of character to the final composition: shading. Shading represents about 50% or 60% of the total time I've dedicated to this piece, as doing it in detail requires a lot of patience. We will start by creating a new layer where we will do the shading, reducing the opacity of the bottom layer, the linear art layer, and using it as a reference to implement all the shadows. Remember that it's very important not to use black color in this phase, as it will limit our ability to color those shadows, for example on the character's skin, that we will implement later. To do this, remember to shade with a soft brush, with some texture if you prefer, and go for a somewhat grayish tone that still maintains the ability to be colored. The first thing we must remember when shading is to imagine what the future light sources will be that we will implement later, as these will determine the direction of our shadows. In fact, shading, while keeping in mind the light sources, will greatly facilitate the process of implementing the lighting effect in our illustration. Personally, for this drawing, I imagined a light source coming from the top right of the canvas, a light source coming from the sphere of the witch's magic staff, and some lighting on the front of Elsa's hand. Once we have in mind what the light sources will be, we can start painting them. Here, the key tools will be two. 1. A soft brush with some texture, and 2. A smudge brush to correct and integrate these shadows. I will make shading tutorials in detail later, focusing on all its parts, but for now, it's very important to remember that the approach to this work will be through having good control of the pressure on the brush. It's better to be subtle and gradually add intensity to the shadows to create the illusion of three-dimensional body that shading allows, and focusing primarily on shading large parts of the elements we are interested in, and then focusing on the small folds and details. It's important to differentiate between shadows cast by objects obstructing light flow, for example, the shadow a person casts on the ground during sunset, and those caused by ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion is a shading and rendering technique used in computer graphics, particularly in 3D modeling and rendering, and of course, like in this case, in digital art, to simulate the soft shadows that occur in crevices, corners, and areas where objects are close together. In essence, ambient occlusion calculates how much ambient light, or indirect light, can reach a particular point on a surface based on its proximity to other surfaces. Areas that are closer together or have tighter crevices tend to receive less ambient light, resulting in darker shadows. This technique helps to enhance the realism of rendered images by adding depth and definition to the scene, as it simulates the natural way light interacts with surfaces in the real world, and it allows us to create that illusion of a 3D effect that adds so much realism and tangibility to the drawing we are creating. For example, this drawing is a perfect example of the application of ambient occlusion evident in all the folds, such as those in the clothing, leather sacks, wrinkles in Elsa's skin, and leather boots, which create that sensation of a 3D body that is so appealing. The process is truly long and tedious, but also relaxing and very satisfying in the end. Patience is key here, and it really pays off. One of the main sources of inspiration to tackle this challenge and redesign Elsa as a dark fantasy witch has been the folkloric character of Baba Yaga, who perfectly embodies the symbol of an older woman with supernatural powers and a strong connection to nature and the forests she inhabits. Baba Yaga is an enigmatic or ambiguous character from Slavic folklore. In some motifs, she's described as a repulsive or ferocious-looking old woman who fries and eats children, while in others, she is depicted as a kind old woman who helps the hero. She's often associated with forest wildlife. Her distinctive traits include flying around in a mortar, wielding a pestle, and dwelling deep in the forest in a hoot, standing on chicken legs. Baba Yaga's origins can be traced back to ancient Slavic mythology, where she was believed to be a supernatural being associated with death, rebirth, and the cycle of life. Over time, her character evolved and became more prominent in folklore, appearing in numerous tales, myths, and legends. Baba Yaga is typically described as an old and haggard woman with a long, hooked nose, iron teeth, and long, straggly hair. Her hut, known as Baba Yaga's hut, is said to move around on its own accord and is guarded by a fence made of human bones topped with skulls. In folk tales, Baba Yaga plays various roles, sometimes acting as a villainous figure who kidnaps and devours children or wayward travelers who stumble upon her hut. In other stories, she serves as a mentor or helper to protagonists, providing them with guidance, magical items, or tasks to complete in exchange for assistance. Baba Yaga is often interpreted as a representation of the wild and untamed forces of nature, as well as the darker aspects of the human psyche. She embodies themes of transformation, initiation, and the cyclical nature of life and death. Some interpretations suggest that she represents the duality of good and evil, or the ambiguity of morality. Baba Yaga has had a significant influence on Slavic culture and literature, appearing in countless folktales, poems, songs, and artworks throughout the centuries. She has also been featured in various modern works of literature, film, and popular culture, both within Slavic countries and internationally. In contemporary culture, Baba Yaga continues to be a popular and iconic figure, appearing in books, films, video games, and other forms of media. She's often portrayed as a complex and multi-dimensional character, with interpretations ranging from menacing and malevolent to wise and benevolent. Overall, Baba Yaga remains a fascinating and enduring figure in Slavic folklore, captivating audiences with her mysterious and unpredictable nature, and serving as a rich source of inspiration for storytelling and artistic expression. We're finishing shading the witch's staff and almost wrapping up the ambient occlusion process. Remember, when shading, focus first on the larger shadows of the element you're working on, breaking it down in your mind into simpler shapes. For example, this staff is nothing more than a very elongated cylinder, so the initial shadows I apply won't be much different from those used to shade a cylinder in 3D. Then, starting from the drawing line on the lower layer, I'm creating those shadows. Shading more or less depending on the depth I think the different gaps and folds between the parts would have. It's almost like sculpting clay. A similar process for the deer antlers. I first focus on the primal shape of the element I intend to shade. In this case, again, the shape of a cylinder. Then I add additional shadows that constitute folds and shapes to give it character and that sense of texture. Speaking of texture, I think the shading on those feathers has turned out quite well. What do you guys think? It seems like we almost have the shading finished. From here, it's been a matter of correcting and refining certain parts, emphasizing shadows in some corners, and creating that bounce light effect in some perimeter areas of the drawing. Here I am, finishing up refining the details of the lights and shadows on the hand. Since it's such a central element in the composition, I wanted to make sure to emphasize the shading enough by creating new folds and wrinkles. To do this, I've used a reference of a real hand, which allows me to understand the behavior of those folds and wrinkles. Guys, remember that taking references from real photographs, interpreting reality, and expressing it in your own way is perfectly legitimate and, in fact, a great strategy for the learning process of drawing. Using references is very important. We've finished the shading process, to which we've added, through this dual technique of working lights and shadows on the same layer, the areas that would be illuminated. With the ambient occlusion and shading process completed, we will proceed to dirty up the drawing using textures. This is a phase that may not always be necessary, especially if you want to take the time to draw such textures or patterns manually. However, with the magic of Photoshop and the possibilities offered by photo bashing, we can replicate hyper-realistic textures in record time. For this, I am using stock photos from a paid platform that are close-ups of textures and of the highest possible quality. Personally, I love conceptual art that has a hyper-detailed appearance, and the use of real textures enriches the drawing and gives it much more character. Additionally, the concept of creating a forest witch is the perfect excuse to dirty up Elsa's clothes, as well as the bones and skulls that complete her attire. To add textures, first, we will paste a suitable photograph onto our canvas. Then we will proceed to desaturate the image until we are left with a black and white version of it. Next, we will set the image to multiply. The blending mode, multiply in Photoshop, combines the colors of the layer with the layer below it by multiplying the color values of each corresponding pixel. This blending mode darkens the image as it effectively multiplies the brightness of the base color by the blend color. Areas of the layer with white or lighter colors have no effect on the result, while areas with darker colors contribute to darkening the underlying layers. This blending mode is commonly used for shadows, shading, and applying textures, as it preserves the highlights of the underlying layers while darkening the areas where the blend color is present. It's particularly useful for adding depth and richness to an image by blending textures seamlessly with the underlying elements. With that mode activated, we will also play with the contrast and brightness levels of the image until we have a resulting texture that is contrasted and can be useful to us, which we can use on multiple occasions, saving a copy of it. In this case, I have used the texture of dirt stains on a wall to roughen up the leather parts of Elsa's outfit. We have also used textures to simulate the fabric of a sheep wool garment to enrich the clothing that Elsa wears under her tattered rags, thus resembling something like a wool sweater. Perhaps, being an ice witch, wearing winter clothes doesn't make much sense, but nevertheless, I think it looks great and quite unique. I have also used the texture of certain bones to bring the skulls that Elsa carries in her satchel to life, as well as in the deer skull, which now that I think about it could be Sven's skull, adding a dark and twisted twist to the drawing's storytelling. As you can see, I have also added more textures to the clothing, simulating woven fabric, emphasizing the part that covers Elsa's arms, as well as the hanging parts of her rags and her hat. Speaking of the hat, the inspiration for the character's hat shape comes from those lithographs from the 17th century during the Spanish Inquisition, typically associated with a period of witch hunting that depicted women who maintained a close relationship with demonic rituals and witchcraft gatherings. Specifically, those lithographs were from Zugarramurdi, a small village in northern Spain with a famous historical reputation for witchcraft activity, which along with Salem or New Orleans in the United States make up the places on planet Earth with real and historical reports of gatherings of women who were, for the benefit of some and the misfortune of others, tried and processed institutionally. It is supposed that the rolled and pointed fabric that formed their hats allowed them to channel the magic of their demonic rituals and openly communicate with the devil in the mentioned village. The village of the witches became synonymous with witchcraft after a series of events unfolded in the late 16th and early 17th centuries. During this time, the mentioned village and the surrounding areas were believed to be hotbeds of occult practices and gatherings known as aquelarres or Sabbaths. These gatherings were seen as rituals involving the worship of pagan deities, the practice of magic, and the summoning of supernatural forces. Local folklore and superstitions combined with religious fervor and fear contributed to the belief that witches were active in the region. The Spanish Inquisition, a powerful institution established by the Catholic monarchs to combat heresy and enforce religious orthodoxy, became involved in suppressing what they perceived as heretical practices in that village. In 1609, an investigation was initiated, leading to a series of trials and interrogations. Many villagers, particularly women, were accused of witchcraft, leading to their arrests, torture, and subsequent trials. The consequences of these trials were severe. Dozens of individuals were convicted of witchcraft and subjected to harsh punishments, including imprisonment, public humiliation, and in some cases, execution by burning at the stake. The trials and executions instilled fear and terror in the local population, leaving a lasting scar on the collective memory of the mentioned village and the surrounding region. The witch trials are remembered as a dark chapter in Spanish history, illustrating the intersection of superstition, religious zealotry, and social tensions of the time. The events serve as a reminder of the dangers of mass hysteria and the persecution of marginalized groups in society. Today, Zugarramurdi attracts visitors interested in its history of witchcraft, with a museum dedicated to preserving the memory of the trials and educating the public about the village's past. In this stage of the process, we have colored the drawing. To do this, I created a new layer called Flat Colors, which allows us to work in isolated groups and return to them in the future to add more details and textures to the color. In this first phase, I focus on making precise selections and not paying too much attention to the color tones, because these, with an easily accessible layer with our base colors for certain parts, can be easily changed when needed. Although there will be many future adjustments regarding color, I am starting to give it the tones that I consider appropriate for the artwork. Being Elsa, the Ice Queen, blues and cool tones are meant to compose a very important part of the composition. Without delving deeply into color theory, I will do future tutorial videos for that, it is worth mentioning that complementary colors are a good way to balance the composition in terms of color. So blues and orange earth tones can be a winning combination. I want the icy blue tone to mix with earthy browns, which also adds a layer of narrative and emphasizes that connection of the witch with the wilderness and forests. In terms of color theory, it is also important to note that red is one of the most powerful magnets to focus the viewer's attention and guide their eyes through those tones. Therefore, red tones will be used especially in the outline of the deer horns, since these constitute the silhouette of our character. Blood red, furthermore, adds that dark fantasy component we are looking for, providing the drawing with a touch of terror and violence. This red will be splattered on the parts of the bones, teeth, and fangs that make up Elsa's attire, subtly indicating that these adornments had been part of her garments for not too long. With the 4 previous stages completed, remembering that first we sketched, then we refined that sketch, then shaded it, and now we just applied color, we should have a satisfactory result to apply lights and effects later on. But for now, we'll focus on our friend Olaf. If with Elsa, we've created a concept far from the character we saw in Disney movies, turning from a beautiful and young sorceress into a forest witch, drawing from Slavic folklore and the concept of Baba Yaga. With Olaf, I want to maintain a certain connection to make the character recognizable, but of course with a dark twist to fit the tone of what we have already created up to this point. Having a reference of Olaf on the canvas itself allows me to resort to his most characteristic features, the shape of the head, the carrot, certain elements of his form language, and depict them in a new creation. In the case of Olaf, I'm going to resort to and draw inspiration from the concept of a golem, as a creature summoned by its creator that obeys their orders without hesitation and acts as their guardian pet. Imagine a time long ago, in the heart of Central Europe, where whispers of mysticism and arcane arts filled the air. It was a period of great turmoil, where the shadows danced with secrets and legends were born from the depths of human imagination. It is within this mystical backdrop that the tale of the golem unfolds. The concept of the golem originates from Jewish folklore, rooted deeply in the traditions and beliefs of the Jewish people. It emerged during the medieval period, a time when mysticism and spirituality intertwined with everyday life. The word golem itself comes from Hebrew, meaning shapeless mass, or unfinished form. Legend has it that a golem is a creature fashioned from inanimate matter, such as clay or mud, by a skilled practitioner of magic, often a rabbi or a wise sage. The golem is brought to life through powerful incantations and rituals, imbued with the breath of life by its creator. Once animated, the golem serves its master faithfully, carrying out tasks and protecting the community from harm. The most famous tale of the golem comes from the Jewish folklore of Prague in the 16th century. According to the legend, Rabbi Judah Loew ben Bezalel, also known as the Maharal of Prague, created a golem out of clay to defend the Jewish ghetto from persecution and anti-Semitic attacks. The golem, towering and powerful, became a symbol of protection and hope for the Jewish community. However, the golem's immense strength was matched only by its lack of understanding and control. As its powers grew, so too did the danger it posed to those around it. In some versions of the story, the golem goes on a rampage, causing destruction and chaos until it is subdued by its creator. The tale of the golem embodies themes of power, responsibility, and the consequences of tampering with forces beyond human understanding. It serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us of the dangers of unleashing forces we cannot control and the importance of humility in the face of the unknown. Even today, the legend of the golem continues to captivate imaginations and inspire storytellers, its legacy enduring through the ages as a testament to the enduring power of myth and folklore. With this concept in mind, I have redesigned Olaf as a giant ice golem, a towering beast standing 9 to 12 feet tall, with anthropomorphic forms that could easily crush any threat that dares to confront the Ice Witch. His torso and head, constructed from blocks of snow manipulated by Elsa's magic, has a horrifying visage with an enormous mouth from which emanates the stench of death and blood. Rows of teeth, nearly as sharp as pure ice icicles covering the beast's body, line its gaping maw. Its arms, broad as the strongest oak branches from the thicket, form the creature's limbs, long and pointed, they promise to inflict pain upon any who dare to bring harm to the Ice Witch, a promise that will surely be fulfilled. In more technical terms, as you can see, I followed a workflow very similar to the one we used when drawing Elsa. I began by sketching, aiming to capture all the narrative elements I want to incorporate into the character, and then refining that draft with a well-defined lineart that allows me to isolate areas correctly. On a separate layer, using the multiply mode, I shaded the drawing and finished refining the ambient occlusion, giving the creation a false sense of 3 dimensions, while keeping in mind what the main light sources will be in the artwork. I've also used textures based on real snow photographs to depict a certain texture on Olaf's skin and give that frosty feeling and add some more detail. Additionally, I've drawn and shaded a couple of icicles based on a reference, and using them as a template, I've copied them to various parts of the golem's body, especially in the neck and leg areas. To finish, I focused on the coloring stage. For this, we created a section for flat colors that we will iteratively refine and add more details to. I focused once again on cool colors, pun intended since we're making a snowman basically, where blues and purples take center stage. I placed special emphasis on the head and particularly its jaws, as this will be a central and narratively important element of Olaf, drawing the viewer's attention. For this, once again, red is a color that adds a lot of contrast if your color palette is mostly composed of cool tones. Additionally, the blood flowing from his mouth adds that touch of dark fantasy and terror that we're aiming for in this challenge. And finally, using a brush with a particle effect and an earthy tone, I've decided to paint a certain dirt effect, especially on the bottom part of the creature, which also contributes to that gritty effect. I think the blood in the monster's mouth quickly adds a layer of horror that suits it, so to speak, wonderfully. I've also painted some details in that blood, like certain reflections that, although they won't be appreciated from afar, taking care of those details is something I personally enjoy. With a smudging brush, I blur some of the blood spurts falling down Olaf's body, giving it a more realistic appearance, and trying to mimic the behavior of a fluid and how it interacts with a snowy surface. Seeing the two Olafs here is almost cute, and I wonder what Disney's Olaf would think upon seeing his dark fantasy counterpart. With the two main characters of the piece completed, it's now time to tackle the challenge of drawing the setting. We'll follow similar steps as before, starting with a rough sketch where we'll incorporate all the ideas that contribute to the narrative aspect of the artwork. In this instance, I envision incorporating a dark forest, positioning the witch and the snow golem in a small clearing within an ancient and icy woodland. A tree with a twisted trunk will take center stage in the scene, perfectly aligning with the dark theme surrounding the witch. However, the angular and exaggerated shapes will also maintain a connection with the realistic cartoonish style of the Disney film. This setting will be familiar to Elsa, as indicated by the bones hanging from the tree trunk and branches, suggesting it's an important ritual and cult site for the Ice Witch. As the guardian of the forest and collector of heads of those who dare to enter her realm, she ritually places the purified limbs of her victims, adding a sinister ambiance. This type of arrangement, where human bones are part of a ritual, has its origins in various cultures across centuries, particularly among pagan peoples in Northern Europe. The importance of pagan rituals involving effigies made from human body parts and bones spans across history and various cultures. These rituals were particularly prevalent among ancient civilizations in Europe, such as the Celts, Germanic tribes, and Norse peoples. These rituals often involved constructing effigies or structures using human bones and body parts as offerings to gods or spirits, or as symbols of protection, fertility, or power. For example, skulls might be displayed as trophies or used in religious ceremonies, while bones could be fashioned into talismans or placed in sacred sites. One prominent example is the use of bog bodies by ancient European peoples, particularly in regions like Ireland, Denmark, and Germany. Bog bodies are well-preserved human remains found in peat bogs, often dating back thousands of years. These bodies are believed to have been sacrificial offerings, punishment victims, or individuals who met with violent deaths. Their discovery provides valuable insights into ancient rituals, customs, and beliefs. Overall, these pagan rituals involving human body parts and bones reflect the spiritual and cultural practices of ancient peoples and their beliefs about life, death, and the supernatural. While some remnants of these rituals remain in archaeological discoveries, their significance in shaping the religious and social fabric of ancient societies cannot be overstated. Back to the technical aspect, here I am polishing the shading and ambient occlusion. In this case, you'll notice that I've colored the illustration before adding the shadows. Since these two parts of the process are worked on completely different layers, it doesn't really matter which one you do first. With the color and shading completed, I'm going to texture the illustration. A couple of stock photos with earth and tree bark textures set to multiply mode and with saturation minimized will be perfect for completing the realistic look of the tree and dirtying up the composition. Finally, I wanted to add another narrative element, the incorporation of a Norse rune. Searching for a type of symbolism that could fit into the narrative of the work, I came across this rune of Norse origin and discovered, in fact, that it translates as courage, which is almost allegorical considering that this is my first YouTube video and perhaps a new stage in my life, and I believe a bit of courage is always necessary. The Valknot, as this rune is called, is a symbol made up of 3 interlocking triangles, and it was believed to represent the power of Odin, the Norse god of war. Here I wanted to represent it as if it were written by the witch herself with blood, referring again to a pagan and ritualistic tone. We are already nearing the end of the video. The process of creating the background has been lengthy, in fact even longer than that of the characters themselves, due to the amount of details and intricacies to cover in terms of shape, shadow, texture, and color. I've played with 3 main layers to create the scenery. A foreground where you can see a fallen log acting as a separator between Elsa and Olaf, the tree we've drawn, and a 3rd layer featuring the same tree flipped 180 degrees, serving as the background. With these 3 layers defined and the 2 characters finished, we can now turn to photobashing to add certain elements that allow for complete cohesion among all parts, and then proceed to the final lighting and effects of the artwork. Photobashing is a technique widely used in digital art, particularly in the realm of concept art for movies, video games, and other media. It involves integrating photographic elements into digital paintings to expedite the creation process and achieve realistic and detailed results efficiently. In the fast-paced world of concept art, where tight deadlines are common and visual fidelity is crucial, photobashing offers significant advantages. Artists leverage stock photos or images from various sources, such as textures, landscapes, objects, or people, incorporating them into their digital artwork. These photographic elements serve as a foundation for the artwork, providing texture, detail, and realism that would be time-consuming to create manually. By utilizing photobashing techniques, artists can quickly establish the visual direction and atmosphere of a scene or environment. This reduces the time required to render intricate details from scratch, allowing for more efficient concept development. Moreover, photobashing enables artists to achieve a level of realism and detail that might be challenging to achieve through traditional painting techniques alone. Consistency is another benefit of photobashing in concept art. Artists can maintain a cohesive visual style across different projects by utilizing the same set of photographic resources or maintaining a cohesive visual library. This ensures that their artwork remains consistent and immersive regardless of the project. Photobashing facilitates an iterative approach to concept creation. Artists can experiment with different compositions, lighting conditions, and color schemes by manipulating and combining photographic elements. This flexibility allows for the exploration of creative ideas and helps refine concepts more rapidly. In the context of video game concept art, photobashing is crucial in the early stages of game development. Concept artists collaborate closely with game designers and art directors to translate abstract ideas into tangible visual representations. Photobashing is often employed in the creation of environmental art, character designs, props, and vehicles for video games. Overall, photobashing has become an indispensable tool in the arsenal of digital artists. It streamlines workflow, accelerates concept creation, and enables artists to deliver high-quality artwork efficiently, meeting the demands of today's creative industries. In this case, you can observe that some additions to the composition are derived from real photographs, such as those I've used to create the frozen lake at Elsa's feet, or the underbrush. Moreover, the snowflakes adorning the branches and trunk of the trees are sourced from high-resolution images of real snowflakes, allowing us to create the illusion of snow sticking to their bodies. This will contribute significantly to the epic feel when we apply the effects of a snowstorm in the final stages of this creation. Without further delay, let me transport you into a world of epic narrative. I encourage you to show your support by leaving a like on this video and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Additionally, I invite you to get creative and craft a fanfic detailing Elsa's transformation from the beloved character we know from the original movies into the sinister forest which depicted in this artwork. Your contributions are valued, and I eagerly await your stories as we put the finishing touches on this piece.
The old kingdom of Arundel has always been a place where the delicate balance of harmony and concord was threatened by fears of the supernatural. Today, once again, that harmony trembles under the rumors of an evil lurking from the depths of the forests beyond the kingdom's borders. Anna, sister of Elsa and Queen of Arundel, receives at the palace a caravan of merchants from the city, their faces contorted by the terror of witnessing death up close. They inform the sovereign of the kingdom that something is amiss in the enchanted forest. It has been 54 long and prosperous years since Anna became regent of Arundel. 54 long years in which an uncomfortable and disturbing reality has been ignored. Nobody heard anything from the sorceress Elsa just a few months after she became the guardian of the forest, assuming her role as the fifth spirit of the enchanted forest. The terrified merchants speak of a magic not witnessed in the kingdom for decades, a magic only the oldest in the palace can remember: ice magic. They continue their chronicle with pale faces, describing how, in their routine task of transporting goods, they decided to take a shortcut through the old enchanted forest. As they penetrated the place, they felt a chilling shiver. Barely 100 feet into the forest, they noticed that the animals living there had been cruelly torn apart. Their bodies, in shreds, were impaled by enormous stakes of ice or adorned the bark of the trees present there, almost in a deliberate, almost ritualistic manner. They didn't take much longer to turn back, but it would be too late for some of them. The witch had heard them enter her forest. Exasperated by the horrifying sight of an old woman clad in furs, bones, and dirty rags, the caravanners sprinted back to redirect their usual path out of the enchanted forest, but few would make it. Some decided to jump off the wagons themselves to start their escape on foot, while others decided to release their pack horses from their respective wagons to begin the escape by riding their faithful animals. But suddenly, the first stake of pure ice, the size of a sword, pierced the back of one of the merchants, effortlessly puncturing his ribcage. Agitated by the horror of the sight, the dozen caravanners panicked, some clumsily stumbling over the roots of the crooked trees that made up the place. These fell victim to the witch, who, impassive, had no restraint in ending the lives of any of them, whom she considered intruders in her realm. The witch's attacks continued without mercy. Dozens of ice stakes pierced the forest. Some of them impaled the old trees or small snowdrifts, while others brutally skewered the various merchants' wagons, horses, or the merchants themselves. Some stakes even seemed to originate from the very ground and impaled those unfortunates enough to try to flee in terror. The screams of pain from those who were impaled but survived the initial impact resounded strongly among the oaks. and their echoes reaffirmed a promise of agony. Half a dozen men survived the hail of ice stakes, but the panic was so great that they didn't realize another danger was approaching from the thicket. The guardian of the forest and faithful companion of the witch Elsa, Olaf, the snow giant. The sight of Olaf was terrifying. A giant almost as tall as 3 men from Arendelle. A face contorted by malice and jaws still stained with the blood of some unfortunate animal that had fallen into his claws and might have been used to satisfy the beast's hunger. Some tried to dodge the ice giant, but 2 others could not. One of them received a brutal blow from Olaf's arms made of tree branches, which violently propelled him meters away, breaking many of his bones in a brief instant. Another died more slowly. The giant was in time to grab one of the unsuspecting men with his trunk-like paws, squeeze his body violently with the force of his hand, and bring him close to his mouth to devour, initially, his head, separating it from his body with a bite before tossing the body into the air. More than a dozen men had entered the enchanted forest that morning. Only 3 would return to the warmth of their homes in Arendelle. Anna's face contorted in the palace as she listened to the story recounted by the survivors, and a chilling shiver ran down her spine. Anna knew perfectly well who this sorceress was, though she was reluctant to accept the truth. Guilt invaded the aging Anna's heart as the survivors continued to expose their harrowing encounter with the witch. Much time had passed since Anna had exchanged words with her sister, and she knew perfectly well that after more than 50 years, it was too late for new exchanges. What could have led Elsa to become the murderous monster she was now? Was it the isolation in the forests? An ancient and malevolent magic unknown to them? Betrayal by the spirits of nature? Perhaps becoming the guardian of the enchanted forest was too great a challenge for Elsa and unraveled unspeakable dangers for her psyche. Anna tried to rationalize the situation, desperately seeking answers with which she could unload her guilt and calm her troubled heart. The courtiers in the palace, dismayed and terrified, remained silent with grey faces around Anna's throne as the survivors recounted the events. It was the elders, those who remembered the extent of Elsa's immense and terrifying power, who appeared most terrified. Suddenly, the palace doors burst open, and 2 exhausted guards with frightened expressions appeared just as the bells of Arendelle begin to toll alarmingly. There is a witch in the city. There is a witch in Arendelle. A witch and a giant. They are killing everyone.
I hope you enjoyed the little fanfic, and I also hope you write yours in the comments. I'll read them all. We're almost done with our Elsa now. Here, I'm just finishing polishing a 3D asset shaped like an icicle to represent the icy and deadly attacks of the witch. Now it's just a matter of transformations. Adding snow particles, adjusting the lighting using a brush in color dodge add mode, and focusing on creating several parts with blur to give that sense of motion to Elsa's attack. The icy stakes have motion blur to emphasize their dynamism, as do the snow particles below them. Finally, I'll use the iris blur, which allows, although not fully appreciable in video, to blur the canvas periphery while leaving the center unaffected, thus focusing the viewer's attention on the most relevant area of the artwork, Elsa. Additionally, this effect also achieves that cinematic sense of depth of field. In this case, with Olaf in the background slightly blurred, it helps create a greater sense of scale for the beast lurking behind. Alright guys, before revealing the final artwork, let's quickly recap the journey we've embarked on with this challenge. Firstly, we created a rather rough sketch, but one that allowed us to incorporate all the elements that make up the character's narrative and help understand their backstory. Then, we focused on refining that sketch with a clean liney art, separating the different areas of the drawing clearly and paying attention to the shape language. Next, we shaded the drawing, keeping in mind the two main types of shadows, cast shadows and ambient occlusion, which allowed us to separate the volumes of the artwork effectively and create the perception of a certain 3D effect. To this shaded drawing, we added a layer of textures in certain areas such as the clothing, the staff, or the skulls, which allowed us to enhance the realism of the composition and make it grittier. Finally, we have created our color layer, first with flat colors and then adding details such as bloodstains, mud, or different skin tones for the character. The combination of these layers gives us the final result. The shading layer and the color layer allow us to sustain the concept art without the need for lines. So at this stage, the lines are removed. To this final result, we have added certain effects, such as snow particles, as well as color corrections for the skin or skulls. The same goes for our little friend Olaf. We first made a sketch, polished that sketch to create the linear art, then shading with ambient occlusion, a layer of color, and finally reached the merging of these layers. And with the necessary adjustments, we achieved the final result. The time has come to show the finalized concept art. It's been a long and genuinely entertaining journey, certainly also very satisfying. Guys, thank you for being there. It's been a pleasure sharing this first video of the channel with you all. I look forward to your feedback, and if you'd like, you can leave a like and subscribe. Without much more to add, let's see how our dark fantasy Elsa and Olaf have turned out.